really early on, you saw some pretty shady things going on the internet. And for me, it was always interesting to see like what the line was and seeing people clearly go over the line. So my interaction or my exposure to security really came from the fraud side of things initially.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC.
Today, I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Will Lin. Will, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And Will, the best way I can describe what you've done, I think, is, you're in the VC community, but you're a partner and co-founder at ForgePoint. And probably most prominently that I've seen, and I apologize if I've missed any other forums, but you're a big inspiration behind, and you're one of the key creators of a group called Security Tinkerers, which has a Slack channel and other resources, but we're really a CISO community and very welcoming and cross-company. So thank you for that. And it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much for all the kudos. Yeah, it's been an amazing experience having an opportunity to help CISOs.
You're doing good stuff. And I know that also you're close with my brother as well, Red Curry. So shout out to him. And he speaks highly of what you guys have done directly. But so thank you for what you're doing, especially for your passion around the subject and around the people. My first question for you to get things going is, how did you find technology, or how did you find cyber as a space and decide that this was for you?
Yeah. I mean, cyber was, speaking of being security, all in on security, it started pretty young. I think a lot of it came from just, number one, just exposure to technology at a young age, primarily via wanting to have exposure to technology at a young age. I'm a first generation anchor baby, according to, some ways of describing.
Anchor baby? I haven't heard that term, and that's my ignorance. Apologies if what is that?
Anchor baby is when your parents who are not U.S. citizens give birth to their child in the U.S. for U.S. citizenship. And so,
wow. Okay. Yes, I understand now. I'm a first-gen immigrant. I was born in Canada, so I'm slightly off base on some of those things. So you're an anchor baby. Please continue.
Yeah. So, very young, my parents, gave birth to me in the U.S. primarily so that I could have U.S. education. Taiwan currency translated to US currency wasn't very much. Mm-hmm. And so, I had these friends with video games, computers at home. I just was really envious of that. And this is when, we were still pre-compact days, way before Dell.
Yep.
And, the only way to get a computer was to basically build one. And so was able to find a couple of spare parts, put a computer together. That sort of just started the journey. People were just really impressed by that early on. And I finally got the opportunity to have a computer, play video games at a young age. And that just,
that's what matters.
Took me down the rabbit hole. That's what matters. The video games.
By the way, do you remember they used to have conventions where you could go and that they would be directly as a consumer pitched on whose memory to get, whose motherboard to get, whose hard drives to get? You used to literally, it was like going to Comic-Con.
Yeah.
And I remember finding fries and being like, wow, it's like a grocery store. And in the back, they had this cage where they kept the CPUs. Like that was the valuable thing. Right?
Yes.
But then they had bins you could go and like sort through. And when I moved to Silicon Valley, I was amazed by it. Do you remember those days of fries, bins, and shopping for parts to put together? Or was this you were scavenging from other people?
I was doing a lot of scavenging, sort of the whole garbage stuff. But
respect for that.
But I definitely went to Fry's, to get pieces once in a while. But it was the CPUs, memories, or the expensive stuff. I usually got those used. But then, for instance, stuff like the thermal paste, that kind of stuff, I'd get from Fry's. But yes, definitely, it was definitely an amazing place to be. And I think my memories were more around sort of all the things that happened, the really shady things that happened around piracy.
Oh, yeah.
I remember that, a lot of that. going on. Like you go to a friend's house and they'd have this, CD case full like burned CDs with, Sharpie on them saying, oh, Dune or whatever the heck it might be. And playing those games. So that's what I remember in terms of the crazy technology bazaar. I also had the chance to go back to Taiwan a couple of times and see the tech scene there. And that was crazy as well, right? Like,
oh yeah,
lots of individual stands and people selling the randomest parts.
Night market. Yeah,
the night market. The technology night market was pretty interesting as well.
I was exposed to that in 2003, and I did stuff with the Taiwanese police. And I was working for Computer Associates at the time, and I went out in the evening because it was my daytime. I was only there a few times for a short period of time, and you'd go out and it would be, I remember there was a Buddhist temple, and right across the street was this masses of computer parts for sale. It was incredible. And all the manufacturing in the semiconductor industry was going on there at the time. So piracy, this was a big deal. And it still is. But in those days, we used to take 5 1/4 discs in hole punches and then 3 1/2s, right? You'd have to defeat the not so hard to defeat, protection physically on it. And then the CD, right? It was all pass around. And it was weird when Napster happened, how people sort of didn't understand that, how to reach the people that influenced and make sure they got it for free, but make sure that you weren't having your license taken advantage of. At what point did you go from assembling, though, and an interest in piracy to an interest in hacking and cyber? What was that transition like?
Yeah. So, there's a theme of finding ways to generate revenue. So whether it was, small business in high school to a small business in college, a lot of it was internet based, leveraging the internet as in e-commerce format. And so really early on, you saw some pretty shady things going on the internet. And for me, it was always interesting to see like what the line was and seeing people clearly go over the line. Mm-hmm. So my interaction or my exposure to security really came from the fraud side of things initially. Mm-hmm. And then my original sort of small business experience, really led me towards venture capital because of my entrepreneur interests.
Did I hear you say that you did like small business while in high school and then in college? So you sort of had little side businesses where you were sort of practicing those entrepreneurial skills, or were you involved with them?
Exactly. Yeah. Lots and lots of side hustles. I did side hustles as well, even when I graduated. Like the most recent example was I had a lot of fun doing the Airbnb for cars, Suturo and Getaround. Cool. They rent out cars. Yeah. I was able to get a fleet of 6 cars in San Francisco. And so, did just lots of small things here and there. It was fun because got to sort of build a business experience, real life experience, in Excel, modeling out revenue, modeling out unit economics, trying to figure out what was, what made sense and what didn't make sense using numbers pretty early on.
Before I pick up on the cars and the numbers, you said video games. I have to ask, did you have a favorite video game? Let's call it in the 90s.
Oh,
if you had games from the 80s, you can feel free to. What game grabbed you?
So 80s, I can't even remember the name of the game actually, but it's the one that you had the little airplane and you're flying around shooting things.
Was it Tapper?
No. I think that wasn't
Microsoft had a simulator in those days. There was a biplane simulator, and somebody out there is screaming at the podcast going, "No, it's this one." But so there was a simulator where you could shoot things. Got it. Any other games? You mentioned Doom.
Doom was a big one. That was a lot of fun. Where I got really serious was more into StarCraft. That was my first one where I went crazy about it. And then I got really competitive, even so far as joining a team and competing in leagues and
like a StarCraft?
Getting invited in Counter-Strike.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And that was all fun. I really wanted to see how far I could go playing video games.
Now there's talk of it being a demonstration sport in, I think they said Fortnite in the next Olympics. I just read about that in The Economist, so it might be pretty fringe or early stage, but have you heard anything about, people already make a lot of money playing video games. Have you heard anything about it becoming a sport?
Yeah. When I was playing StarCraft and Counter-Strike, I was looking at sort of international. So for instance, Korea went really deep into StarCraft. The highest paying StarCraft player, and this was a long time ago, it was making about $1 million a year.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we could definitely see it become a quote unquote sport long term. In fact, I competed in a league that doesn't exist anymore called the Cyber Athletes League. And so we were using sort of that term really early on. And seeing something like, for instance, Twitch really early on in its life cycle as well, sort of seeing the possible entrepreneurship, the business opportunities within video games. And so that was definitely something I considered. It was just a question of timing. And, of course, timing wise, nowadays it's much more of a business, right? Like you can do the whole sort of live streaming, lots of people watching you, sponsorships, all that kind of stuff.
I wonder if white hat hacking or, what have you, will one day be a sport of the same sort. Well, I guess it kind of is. You get paid for it to some degree.
Right. Yeah.
I wonder if it would even be a demonstration sport of the Olympics. Of course, it's starting to feel like Snow Crash at that point. But let's shift gears then and say, so you mentioned cars, right? Now, I was curious if COVID might have affected that startup or if you put it in mothballs, but feel free to answer that. But are cars a passion of yours? Because I know racing is a thing too for you.
Yeah. So I mothballed that a couple of years ago.
Oh, so well before COVID. Yeah.
Yeah, well before COVID. One thing I find is that when you jump into something pretty early and you ride that wave of adoption, it's usually really exciting and actually pretty profitable, right? And you learn that really early on with building computers and selling them. That was so freaking impressive for people. I didn't realize it was so impressive. And then when I did realize it was so impressive, that's when I made a sort of a small business out of it. And so similarly with the Get Around Turo, when I jumped in, there were, very, very few people on the platform, probably 100 cars in the Bay Area being rented out.
Being early is almost worse than being late. I mean, you have to create the demand. You have to stimulate it, and the models aren't known.
True. And there's definitely components of that. But the nice thing about being a part of those communities is that they were busy building them. Like Get Around Turo were busy finding the drivers to rent the cars. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I had to focus primarily on sort of which cars to buy and rent, thinking about maintenance, thinking about pricing, thinking about advertising it. But it was all within their platform. And so, of course, we paid like a platform fee as a part of it. But then what happened is that as more people sort of found out about it, then it was just got less and less interesting. Like initially, the prospect of letting someone drive your car was just scary, right? It's like, what are these people going to do? Right. And every time the car came back fine, in fact, sometimes people brought it back better than I gave it to them. It just gave me more like, wow, people are really amazing. Like, wow, like all these fears of others, and these are just random people. It was really, really positive. But then what happened is as more and more people got into it, it got more and more, commoditized. People started treating the cars like a rental car. Then, that's when it got less interesting and less exciting. Similarly with Bitcoin, like jumping in at $12, being able to do mining really early on and then getting to ride that wave as well. And so I found jumping in early into these consumer things that get a lot of adoption generally tends to be pretty rewarding.
That's awesome. Now, specifically driving cars, is racing a thing for you? I think I'd heard a rumor to that effect.
Yeah. So that was one of the, after competing in video games, I was like, okay, what else am I going to compete in? And I've always really cherished having a car. It was, of course, a lot of us have that dream as a young age, especially in high school, of independence.
What was your first car? I have to ask.
So my first car was a light blue Toyota Camry.
Nice.
It was it was reliable.
It's a good car.
Yeah, it was no frills.
Was it new?
No. We bought it for like $4,000, $5,000, something like that.
More respect. That's good. Yeah.
It was nice. It never broke down on me. And light blue is, being able to rock that color required a lot of confidence. So
my first car was also light blue. This is going to date me. It was old when I got it. I had a 1974 Fiat Bertone X19 blue, light blue. And it cost me $800 in 1989. And I had to take a loan from my girlfriend to pay for it at the time. So if she's out there, I won't name her. But thank you. I did pay it back. So yeah, it takes real machismo to rock a light blue car, speaking from personal experience. What do you drive now?
Yeah, so now I drive just a Model 3. So after I got into big into racing, getting to experience sort of all the different dynamics of racing cars, right? Like every time you change a setting on the shocks or changing the shocks themselves, roll bars, tires, wheels, all the power mods you can do. I sort of got a really good sense of, okay, this is how a car handles, you do this, that happens, learning the cause and effect of a car. And then competing in that, getting sponsored in that as well. And then after a while of sort of really sort of understanding everything I really wanted to understand, competing and doing well, now I'm sort of just driving a Model 3. It's a good car to go from A to B. The technology is fun, in terms of autopilot.
It's a great car. There's no just in that sense. It's an awesome car. Not that I have one. I don't. I drive something more, shall we say, contemporary. I think I need to get over to the sort of more environmentally conscious vehicle, but I'm not really driving very much right now at all. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Oh my God. Everyone is, right? Yeah. Everyone's driving very much.
I think I've filled up my gas tank twice in the last 4 months. I mean, that's dramatic, but
it's crazy versus like once a week or multiple times a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To this, right? No more Boston traffic for me, no more San Francisco for you. But so you've got these passions that have grabbed you. And at the same time, you've both really indulged in them and gone deep and tinkered. I guess Security Tinker is the name of your community, or one of the communities that you're part of and co-founded. But you've got these, and then they sort of uplift you a bit. And somewhere along the line, that became security and it became technology embracing. And then how did you get into the VC world? How did that happen?
Yeah. I'd say I got pretty lucky getting into VC. So the way I did it was I started in investment banking right out of college.
Well, where did you go to college and what did you study?
Yeah. So I went to UC Berkeley, and then I studied economics, all with the intent to focus on sort of this intersection of business and technology. When I initially started, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in technology. And the reality is I was primarily consumer centric. I was playing with all these consumer themes and toys.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so I got into tech investment banking and I was really lucky to just underwrite a lot of really fun IPOs in technology. And so
cool.
I got to work on Facebook, got to work on GoPro.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was really rewarding experience. But as I was helping write these sort of prospectuses, or at least reading them as an investment banking analyst, I sort of got a sense over time like, oh, this is not super differentiated. Like, how can I build knowledge here that will help me long term into the future? And then what I realized is that the enterprise world was something that just required a lot more knowledge and learning to be really good at it, or at least not even good at it, but just to even feel comfortable investing in it. Right? Like in consumer, all of us are consumers. And so we all sort of have our own personal experiences. And so if you feel comfortable to be an investor, you feel comfortable to invest in consumer. And so I just spent a lot of time thinking, okay, I'm probably more of an enterprise investor because I just really value technical knowledge. And then I added in sort of all the small business experience I had. And I just realized, I probably want to go down the enterprise route. And so I got into venture by joining a firm called Untitled Capital. It was more of a traditional process from investment banking to venture. It was a bit unique then. Out of my class of investment banking analysts across all the banks, there are probably 3 or 4 analysts my year out of class of maybe more than 100 that got into venture. And I joined Untitled Capital, which is enterprise centric. And when I joined Untitled Capital, they had 4 key areas. Security was one of them. And I just immediately just zoomed in on security. I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. I mean, when I add in all the fraud experience that I had or exposure that I had, it just made a ton of sense. On the positive side as well, as I also got to work with just an amazing team within Trident that focused on security. And actually, that team that I worked with then is actually the team that spun out of Trident to create ForgePoint. That's why I'm one of the co-founders. I've been working with my co-founders for a decade.
And you have this emphasis on community, and I have to say, everybody, and I don't mean this just as a compliment, but everybody I know who knows you loves working with you. They all say that you connect well with them, you help them connect with others. Is community a new emphasis for you? Am I inferring too much? Has it always been there as a thing for you? Because there's an emerging group of hundreds of CISOs that I know who talk together, partly because of you. Is that a thing?
Yeah, I would say that I did not even realize this was a skill or something that people could do Just growing up without my parents for a really long time, this whole concept of community for me actually comes more closer to sort of family. And so for me, this is sort of my professional family versus just calling them colleagues. And so that's a big reason why we care so much for each other within the Tinkers. That's why we spend a lot of time focusing on helping each other as well.
Yeah, you can definitely feel it.
Yeah. And the reality is that a lot of leadership roles are just very lonely roles. I mean, you have people who report to you, and you just have to, you can't share every single negative thing that happens to your team. I mean, that's pretty demoralizing to be doing something like that. And so, needing the opportunity just to talk to your peers, to both talk about situations, to learn from each other, to benefit from the crowd, each of which has sort of a superpower, was really powerful. But the console community, I did not have the skill beforehand. And it was very much learning as we go. I have to credit it, though, to sort of the initial 10 folks that were part of the group. I think they were all friends. And I think that common friendship between them and me and then each other was sort of the foundation of what created sort of the values of the group that we have, the principles, all the things that we want to do. And once sort of those things got really obvious, that's what enabled the group to continue to grow, but in a healthy way. And the reality is, and as you know, Sam, like we try to keep Tinkers fairly underground. We don't talk about it. We don't have a website for it.
I know. I'm saying first rule of Tinkerers Club, and I went and wrote it.
No, it's not at all. No, we talk about it enough externally, but we're not actively trying to grow the group either.
It's not a club by any means. It's just people talking to each other.
Exactly. And so it's one of those things where it's like, it's so valuable and people like it so much that they're very protective of it. So they're focused on, hey, let's just not grow the group willy-nilly. Let's not add people for the sake of it. And that's been super rewarding. I mean, the reality is security is such a small ecosystem. And at some point in time, everyone's going to meet everyone else in security. And so being able to just sort of focus on the values, focus on helping each other versus focus on growth has sort of been a key fundamental component, I think, to the group being what it is today.
And the principle to live by. We're low on time. I've got 2, maybe 3 questions if I can squeak them in.
Yeah, of course.
So let's do a little shift of gears. And I know you like science fiction in general, but so feel free to answer with a sci-fi answer or anything. Do you have a book you'd recommend as either topical right now or important for cyber or entrepreneurism? So someone's out there listening and you say, man, if I could have him or her just read one book that I think is awesome and highly influential over me and that they would like, and picture this person, this person listening, what would it be, if anything?
Yeah. In terms of a VC or entrepreneur book, I really liked a book called Play Bigger. It's all about sort of creating a new category and sort of the benefits of that, how to create it. That one was really exciting because, I think a lot of VCs, we really enjoy investing in new categories. That's sort of what enables you to invest in a sort of a public company long term, or a company that grows into a public company.
In spite of the being early can sometimes be worse than being late comment from earlier, I don't like when companies just chase TAM. I like it when they find something and money moves to it. But is that too glorified? Is that too idealistic? Or are you in fact saying, hey, lean in and become a category creator because the worst thing you do is fail? Like, big deal, right?
Yeah. Sometimes I have a tough time sort of mentally rationalizing this within myself. So for instance, this idea of creating a new category, because then my flip side to it is, well, where does the budget come from, right? It has to come from somewhere else. Is the concept of a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. And I think the reality is it's not pure zero-sum in all aspects of the world. It's more around sort of solving someone's problem in a more modern, more creative, and more topical way. And so the one I like to talk about when I talk about creating a new category is more of a consumer one, just because everyone has a personal experience in it. And this is primarily around ride sharing, right? I mean, what happened there was, yes, there is some concept of a zero-sum game in which they took budget away from taxis. But then there was also a concept of them creating and expanding the size of the market as well, as people transition from driving to doing rideshare. And then on top of that, moving from renting cars to rideshare. And so it's a tough balance. How much of it is zero sum? How much of it is just people traveling more because it's easier to do.
Mm-hmm.
But when you create these new categories, it's sort of, that's what enables you to, become like a Kleenex or a Clorox or a Uber, for example. It's creating a concept that people haven't thought about before and that making it real. And of course, that concept has to solve a core problem for it to exist.
Right. It's like what VHS almost did to movie theaters, or what Netflix did to Blockbuster, right? At some point, it's going to happen. And yeah, I'm with you. Second question. Do you have any advice for whoever's listening and thinking, I'm in cyber. Yeah, I'm interested in what Will does. I'm interested in getting more involved in some of those lean in category creation things. Do you have any advice for those people?
What I've learned is that everyone learns very differently. They think about the world differently, whether it's something as basic as visual versus auditory learner, that kind of stuff. And so for me, I really enjoy thinking about the world on a framework basis, especially because we meet so many startups and talk to so many CISOs and talk about so many problems. Like, how do we mentally categorize everything? And I think there's a reason why, for instance, consultants love thinking in frameworks as well. It's because they work with so many clients. They need to be able to sort of structurally make sense of the world. And so I think that's one sort of end goal that everyone should look towards getting to, is like, hey, how do I sort of create a framework based off of my experience? Because I think that's one example of really learning and understanding an industry or a problem end to end, when you can sort of think about it in terms of a framework.
Now, we didn't talk much about risk, and I won't unpack that one because to some degree, I don't think we have to, because there's a subtext of take risks. There's a subtext of lean in and test and try to create categories. So if I can't do risk in the time that we have remaining, I will ask you one last question. It's about poker. I don't know if you play. I have a suspicion if you like video games, you probably also like some tabletop games.
Of course.
Would you be up for a security poker game or game of some sort? If I can figure out how to do it in an age of COVID, then I will, although cards are really hard to do that way without a program. But if not, then maybe at the next time several of us are all in the same location, would you be up for joining in a poker game or something of that ilk?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's less about playing poker and winning. It's more around sort of getting to learn and meet someone and experience sort of how they think via the game.
I agree. It's funny, my wife and I, we play card games. We play bridge and whist in particular with another couple. That you get to really, of course, we're not on the same team because that can break up a marriage. But, so we play opposite each other, which lets us make fun of our partners instead. But I would love to organize that and have you there at some point, Will. And thanks so much for being on the program today.
This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you sort of asking these questions because, it's really fun to go down memory lane together. Thanks for the opportunity.
It's a great story, and I'm sure the listeners loved it too. Thanks again.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.